Can your dependents get an ITIN for tax purposes? Have you ever wondered if your dependents can obtain an individual taxpayer identification number for tax purposes? This is an important question for many families, especially those with members who may not qualify for a Social Security number. Let's break it down. Yes, dependents who cannot get a Social Security number can be issued an individual taxpayer identification number. This number is provided by the Internal Revenue Service to individuals who need a U.S. taxpayer identification number but are not eligible for a Social Security number. This often applies to dependents who are non-U.S. citizens or non-residents but are claimed on a U.S. tax return. So, who exactly needs an individual taxpayer identification number? If your dependent cannot obtain a Social Security number but is included on your U.S. tax return, they will need an individual taxpayer identification number. This situation frequently arises for non-resident aliens or foreign nationals. Now, let's talk about how to apply for this number. To get an individual taxpayer identification number for a dependent, you will need to fill out Form W-7, which is the application for the Internal Revenue Service Individual Taxpayer Identification Number. You must submit this form along with your tax return that lists the dependent. It is important that the dependent is listed as a qualifying person for certain credits or exemptions. Having an individual taxpayer identification number can also help you claim some tax benefits. For example, dependents with an individual taxpayer identification number allow you to claim the $500 non-refundable credit for other dependents. However, keep in mind that certain credits, like the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit, requiring the dependent to have a valid Social Security number. So, if your dependent only has an individual taxpayer identification number, they will not qualify for those specific credits. When it comes to residency requirements, the dependent generally needs to be a U.S. resident alien or U.S. national, or they must meet certain residency criteria. They must also fit the Internal Revenue Service definitions of a qualifying child or qualifying relative. Additionally, residency tests, such as the substantial presence test, may apply. There are special cases to consider as well. For children in the process of adoption who do not have a Social Security number, an adoption taxpayer identification number may be issued instead. However, if the child is not a U.S. citizen or resident, an individual taxpayer identification number is necessary to claim them as a dependent. For many Asian American families, having dependents without Social Security numbers due to immigration status can be common. Obtaining an individual taxpayer identification number for these dependents allows families to file tax returns properly and claim allowable tax benefits. It is essential to follow Internal Revenue Service instructions carefully when applying for individual taxpayer identification numbers. Ensure that dependents meet eligibility criteria and understand which tax credits can be claimed with an individual taxpayer identification number. In summary, dependents can indeed get an individual taxpayer identification number for tax purposes if they are not eligible for a Social Security number but are claimed on a U.S. tax return. This allows families to claim some tax benefits, but not all, since certain credits requiring a valid Social Security number. It is important to apply for individual taxpayer identification numbers in a timely manner and stay informed about the tax rules related to these dependents.